So here we go.
So why we have gathered, what we've gathered to discuss as a group is, yes, you are a brand. And we chose that title because we get asked that quite a bit over, especially over the last 6 or 7 years. It's like, well, do I have a brand? And do you mean my personal brand or do you mean my business brand? And we always answer that question, whether it's asked that way or in a different phrase, is like, yes, you have a brand, whether or not you work on it, whether you think of it as a professional brand, like what you put on LinkedIn, or you think of it, you don't think of it at all. The reality is that you do have a brand. Who you are, your whole being is your brand. So we're going to explore our own personal journeys about our personal brands. And then we're going to have some structure around what we think a brand is. And then we're going to discuss this personal branding program that we have coming up that's starting next month, which is like a couple weeks away, that we're so excited about, and just share some highlights about what we're going to cover there and take your questions. I think we're also going to talk about obstacles too, right?
Yeah, if we have time. Yeah. So before we dive into the content, we have a TPQ, a thought-provoking question for you. It's kind of a two-parter, and you can put your answer in chat. And the question is, who is a personal brand in your industry that you admire? And why did you select her or him? What are a couple of traits of why you selected the person you selected? And while people are gathering, how about we answer that, Em?
Oh, okay. Yes. Who's a personal brand that I admire in my space? I mean, I might take a lot of people's answers here, and I don't know if she's exactly in my space. I would aspire to that, but Brene Brown for sure is a person, a human being that I admire, who I admire. And I think she's in the self-discovery space and that I really consider what we do a lot of just personal discovery and growth. So what I admire about her is that she's very real, particularly now that she's got her podcasts. She keeps it so real. She'll talk about her failings. She'll talk about the things that are not going well. Her sisters work with her, so she's done some episodes with her sisters, and you really feel like you're sitting around their kitchen table. She's relentlessly authentic, and she's also challenging in a way. You know, she'll put hard questions out there. She'll challenge herself. She brings on challenging guests, and I think those are the reasons why I love her. What about you? Who's the one for you? Oh, I can't hear your lovely voice.
Sorry, amateur. So he's not necessarily, kind of like Brene Brown's not directly in our space. This person is, but his career prior to becoming a thought leader was, and that's Ryan Holiday, who is a resident of Bastrop, Texas now. And I think Ryan, I admire for three reasons. One is what I would refer to as moral consistency. This is a person that keeps open to ideas, but doesn't have a lot of wobble. He's not a relativist, but he's also not a narrow-minded person. He's what I call a third-way thinker. The second is that he's a great model for how to build a brand around a philosophy instead of an offering. So you buy into his philosophy, which is around mindfulness and stoicism and things. And then when you buy into his philosophy, then you can buy his products. And then I think the third trait that I love about him is that he like similar to Brene Brown, he challenges your thinking on a lot of things. And I think he especially challenges the thinking of binary thinkers, people that have this sort of very kind of black and white view of the world. So yeah, there's a couple of answers coming in on chat.
Yeah, I saw that. Marie Forleo was mentioned by Maya. Thank you. Yeah, Maya says she looks up to her because she's authentically positive herself, clear on her mission, which comes across in everything I've seen that she does in her business. That's so true. Yes. Mm-hmm. We have another one.
Amber Gray at Trusty Oak VA Services, extremely authentic, collaborative, and has lots of integrity. I think we're seeing a theme here.
I love that.
Yeah.
Very good. Cool. So marinate on that. If somebody comes to mind, maybe jot them. If you've got something for notes in front of you, jot them on the corner, drop it in whenever you like. So here's another one. Mine is a Latina immigration, Abogaldatina. I'm probably mispronouncing that. She brings in her faith, authenticity, and family in her posts, and her advocacy is very inspiring. Thank you, Mariette. Mallory Erickson is a nonprofit professional who talks about impact. Okay, Abogada Latina, that's her handle. Thank you, Mariette. So check her out. Great. Now, as you think about those people, you think about, you're describing not just who they are as people, but also their brand, right? So our definition of brand, which I'm sure if you've attended anything, you've heard us say it maybe hundreds of times, but your brand is how other people experience what you believe. And so what you're getting from those people are their deeper beliefs, right? Their commitment to authenticity, their commitment to advocacy. And that's a really important part. But, while we can talk about those things and point to them as we think about our, the people that we look up to, a lot of times it's a really windy road to get there. And so the first thing that we're just going to chat about is our own windy roads to how we got to the personal brands that we have today, Justin and I have today, because we want to be personal and we want to be very transparent. So I'm going to share my screen for a sec. Pause game. All right, here we go. Here we go. I'll show y'all if it wants to play along. Can you see little Emily here?
It says loading still. There we go.
There she is. Hands on hip.
You still do that. You still have that same pose.
I didn't quite know how to put my hands on my hip. So I'm doing this, which is an interesting move. I think I was figuring out. I didn't have really hips yet. So makes me laugh. So I'm one of 4 children. And as a kid, I had a very active imagination and like a very strong sense of myself, which I think is carried a little bit in this photo. And I sort of lived a lot in my mind because I had 3 brothers. And so they sort of like played in their world and I would come in and out of it. But I had this, because of my active imagination, I had a strong sense of who I was and in that world. And as I grew up and I grew into my professional life, I kind of always had that. And I had this other separate self that was a person who really was more comfortable behind the scenes. I was more comfortable storytelling. And I felt like I was uncomfortable kind of taking too much of a step forward. I had this reticence. Really, my personal journey to branding or personal branding was a very like slow one. And I didn't feel comfortable necessarily sharing who I was. And I was teased a lot as a kid because of my my imaginative ways and I was a little bit dramatic. So I didn't want to kind of incur that kind of teasing as I grew older. So I resigned myself a little bit to being in the background. And so I definitely stepped away from anything that would put too much of a spotlight on me. That became harder as I become more of a leader in my career. But I was very comfortable behind the scenes. So I did journalism and PR, and those were things that I could be, in the background, making somebody else look good and helping somebody else develop their brand. And there was this other thing about, brand and notoriety that I kind of saw it as falseness. I saw it as, something that was really manufactured. And so I had a real negative connotation toward it. And part of that was being kind of behind the scenes in journalism and PR. I saw a lot of people who would put themselves out there one way, and that really wasn't who they are. And that was kind of gross to me and disgusting. And not everyone who engages PR does that, but I came across plenty of that in both fields that I was in. And so when I kind of began Root and River and knew that I really had to work on my personal brand, both for the business, but even a little bit before that, as a professional in the corporate world, I knew that having a strong, integrity, a reputation, that really interested me. And I knew that, as a journalist, my byline meant something. It represented, when somebody saw that a story was written by Emily Sikorsky, like that meant something as far as how trustworthy I was as a source. So I began to get more comfortable with the idea a little bit there. And then when I really started to work on branding, and Justin challenged me to work on my own personal brand, I felt extremely uncomfortable, felt a little invaded, felt a little bit like, no, I can just keep up like just being great at what I do, and I don't need to worry about my brand. I don't know if anyone in the chat can relate to that. So I did have to do some soul searching, and this is kind of where I landed. These 3 core truths I came across that helped me figure out how I could tackle personal branding and do it with integrity myself, and feel safe enough to dive into what I truly believed and what I was truly good at. So the first one is this idea that branding is paying attention to and articulating who you are at your core, what you believe in, and how you act from that place. And as a deep introspective person, that did appeal to me. So one of the first things I did when I started working on my personal brand is call my dad. If you know me at all, I'm a very family focused person. So I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I'm a bit lost and I'm a bit reticent to do this work, but I need to. Can you talk to me about me? Can you tell me what your impressions are of me? And so it's starting there at that core, right? Going to somebody who's really close to you, or going inside of yourself to determine, who you are at the core, what you believe in, and then how do I connect that to how I behave? And really taking a critical eye. Maybe I'm really not showing. At that time, I really wasn't showing a lot of my creative self, my artistic self to the world. I kept that hidden away, again, to protect it from criticism. So it's when I thought of branding in this way, in this process, I knew there was integrity in it, and I gave myself permission to do that. And I really this mindset shift allowed me to see that branding is really validating my own worth, and that's definitely something that I saw the value in. And then I thought of branding as a way of taking care of myself. And this has been a journey for me. I've gotten better at it. But as I shifted to that mindset, I let go of the idea that it is about falseness or a construct. And branding is really kind of code for self-care. When you feel like you have a brand to tend to, and or you're curious about the ways you can explore that, it takes on a little bit of a different energy, a little bit of a different vibe. And it's also being continually curious about your own evolution. So part of self-care is knowing where you are today and how maybe that's shifted and changed, and giving yourself credit for those shifts. And then also glimpsing the future, setting goals, doing visioning in a way that feels organic and right to you. And it's really all about intention. There's a lot of intentionality in it. So that helped me shift, because I love intentionality, and I love the idea, and I've gotten better at the idea of how I take care of myself really impacts every part of my professional self and my brand. And then finally, this last idea, which I come back to, I revisit all these ideas regularly whenever I feel like, oh, I don't want to do this thing, post this content, or work on myself. That my brand, which are basically my stories, my observations, and my experiences, have the potential to touch somebody else in a way that's very healing and positive. And so I kind of took that one as well, maybe that's the case, we'll see. But the more I started being more forward and more outspoken about what my brand is, the more people came to me and said things like, thank you for your work. And, that really touched me. Or, will you mentor me, which was something that blew my mind. And I realized the power that one person's story has to touch another human being. And so that's a continual motivator for me. So all these things put together really helped me shift my mindset around what personal branding was, and it opened me up. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, I always like hearing how you, I mean, we've known each other for 8 years almost. So, but I
Mhm.
always learn something when you tell your story. I like the detail of talking to your dad about who you are. And I'll kind of jump off of there is that I think I know I did for years use personal branding as a way to sort of subconsciously solve an identity crisis. And now we say to people, whether you're branding yourself or your business, branding, trying to use branding to solve an identity crisis is just dumb. It doesn't work. But along the way, I literally wrote a book on personal branding right there, called Human Bacon. It's personal branding for men, and it's held up pretty well, with some of the concepts and ideas. But I think the thing to remember for myself is that personal branding, at least in the terms of intrinsic branding, the way that we teach it, is about kind of these three parts that are linked together. And the first is it's a contemplative practice. So matching that with my story is I wasn't really a contemplative person until about 7 years ago. I was a thinker, but I wasn't necessarily contemplative. And the more I got to know myself, the more I knew what I wanted to show the world, which is the second thing, which is expression. And I vigorously went about the work over the years of being known as kind of a branding guy. And it's what I do, but it's not who I am. If I was to identify with something, it would be as a creative now, which I still even feel uncomfortable saying, but I still know it's true because I create shit. So I must be. So, and then the last part is the experience. So you contemplation, expression, experience, and experience goes to something that you and I teach, that your brand is how other people experience what you believe. And as my beliefs have deepened and become much more intrinsic, and I've deconstructed a lot of old belief systems and narratives and models, I feel finally like I'm just branding me. I don't feel like I'm aware that there's a type of image. I was talking to someone this morning who's also on a public stage. And I said that a lot of the things that I say are supposed to be conversation starters, but they're taken as conversation stoppers. Even though that's not, so I'm aware of that reputation. I'm aware of being vulnerable, but there's no guile in any of it. I'm just following the muse, and expressing it. I think the other aspect of this kind of goes to expression is that it's, I would say, almost virtually impossible to build a personal brand without being having some sort of content creation practice. It's a little bit like someone that's really good singing in the shower, and they should probably be in a band, but they're not. And you have to. I think back to I think it was Wayne Dyer, who said, "Don't die with music still inside you." So, kind of this idea of this big three, and the first one, just linking it together, is thought leadership. And you have to know, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, what conversation you want to start with the world. And don't be a karaoke singer or a cover band. Have original thought around how you see the world. Sometimes we call this a unique point of view. Sometimes we call it a philosophy. But what you're doing is, like I mentioned, Ryan Holidays, you're building a brand around who you really are, and what message or philosophy you want to share with the world. And so thought leadership it starts with the question of what original am I creating? This is the artistic side of one of the artistic angles of personal branding, is you have to know what you're creating to show the world. And thought leadership is an essential way of doing that. The second is IP creation, intellectual property creation. And again, this goes back to art, or creative content. So writing, videos, podcasts, art, visual art, poems, like all of it is IP creation, including like processes and methodologies. You can build a personal brand if you have a philosophy and then you have IP of kind of a process that you can take people through. That's how many people have built their personal brands, but they were thought leaders that created their own IP. They weren't thought leaders who just borrowed from somebody else. So IP creation is a discipline, and it requires you to suspend humility and really think like an inventor in the process. Is what do I want to invent to bring into the world? And then the big one here, this third one, is relationship nurturing. Again, it doesn't really feel optional. It doesn't, I think whether you're introverted or extroverted, or like me, an antisocial extrovert, you have to go out and build relationships. You just get to do it on your terms, on how you want to do it. And I moved to Austin 7.5 years ago. I knew one person here, and now I know thousands. And it came from relationship nurturing. Some people I still talk to on a regular basis. Some people I see once in a while. And I have very carefully curated a circle of friends. Many of them I've never met in person, around the world. And those friendships and those relationships, and nurturing that relationship, has not only grown my brand and theirs, but it's also produced, all kinds of various opportunities. So a very specific example years ago is I was one of the speakers at an event in Idaho when I lived there, and the main speaker was Ron Price, this guy named Ron Price, and I was very kind of smitten by him, like a man crush on his intellect and his presence, and so we became friends, and he became my first mentor. And in 2014 or late 2013, he goes, "You got to meet TTI's new VP of marketing, Emily Sicorsi." And so Emily and I met in January of 2014, and now look where we're at with this great, beautiful friendship, great partnership, this awesome brand, awesome team, awesome clients. And it was all because I had the wherewithal and the courage to walk up to Ron and introduce myself. And I could tell you 1,000 stories like that, just one conversation leading to something significant.
I love tracing back those connections to, how we got here. And it definitely does a lot of the time go back to relationships, that you were courageous enough to just introduce yourself or do something different. I'm sitting here today because I decided at my PR job, where I was kind of miserable, that I wanted to get back into writing. So I reached out to an old friend who was an editor and said, "Hey, if you ever have any freelance pieces that would be interesting, let me know." Kimberly Hundley. And she gave me an assignment not too long after to go interview the CEO of TTI. So the rest is history there. And if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't recognized my own need to get back into the more creative pursuit, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you for the comments about our stories and what we shared so far. Yeah, it is deep work. That's kind of a theme that's coming up in chat. Anna says, "That's why I have karaoke night regularly, to express myself." That's great. Yeah, expression can take a lot of different forms. And, those terms like thought leadership and IP creation, they can be intimidating, but they're really just expression. So, and it can start with something that's unrelated to the work you do, like karaoke or, art.
Yeah. And I think the mindset of personal branding, this goes to obstacles, is, the only way out is through, or the obstacle is the way, to quote a Ryan Holiday book. And the thing that this obstacle, the blockage that we have related to, well, and I have nothing really to say, or whatever, that worry or that fear is the doorway to your personal brand. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be around competency. Competency is a commodity now. There's a lot of people that can do a lot of excellent things, thanks to, modern technology and whatnot. But there's only one you. And so in that process of thinking about obstacles, it's not so much about waiting for that feeling to go away. Like, oh, I've got it. I'm just going to do it now. I'm ready to go. It's a lot of it's just like, just effing do it, right, and see what happens. Because one of the things we know, just from a human psychology standpoint, is that often confidence trails action. For sure. You take the action, you start sharing, and then you start to get a little traction, then you get a little more confidence, and then, now you're off and running. But if you don't tackle that initial, or work through, I should say, that initial obstacle or obstacles, I think that you're going to get stuck there. What are some other obstacles that you have witnessed in yourself and all the work we do with thought leaders?
Yeah, I mean, just building off of what you're saying, I think one of the main obstacles that people come to us with and that I struggled with was like, what do I say? I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know what message do I have? So there's two parts to that pushback. That obstacle is like, for me, it was like, why do people want to hear from me? Again, I was trained as a journalist, so I was citing sources, I was looking at data, I was bringing things together, but I was not sharing my opinions, and that was very clear. And so to get over the hurdle of like what I have to say has impact and weight and has worthiness, I think is part of that. The second part of it is really just making the space, to your point about like action, just doing it, making the space to look inside and figure out what you really do want to say and who you really are. And that's iterative. Mariette is on, so I want to use her as an example of she'll let me, but I've known Mariette for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and I've seen her iterate on her brand all the time. She's tweaking something, she's launching that, she's changing messaging, she's evolving the look and feel. And I think that's something that we watch other people do, but it feels really intimidating. And so we don't give ourselves room or time or patience to say, I'm going to start here with a little bit of knowledge, and then I'm just going to trust that it evolves and iterates. And that's what I think is super cool about this program that we're launching, is that it gives you the time and the space to be in that iterative process. But I think just not knowing where to start and what to say is one of the big obstacles.
I think, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that another one, and they're kind of cousins of each other, is there's no strategic clarity, no strategic intent. Like, why am I doing this? And what happens is it becomes obligatory.
Mm.
It feels like another thing on your task list. And then you start to equate it with time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have time for that. Because branding is a practice, it has the same rules as like yoga or meditation or exercise or art. Is that it doesn't happen if you don't do it, but you still need to know why you are doing it. And so I recommend just picking something, especially that's more soul oriented. I love what you said, Em, that, as you did your thing and you shared more of yourself with the world, and I was witness to how reluctant you were and how brave you were to do that. Then what happened is that it almost revealed the intention that just to go out and basically be light in the world, and to bring a little bit of like spark to people's lives with the way that you present yourself. I think, and so, if that's the strategic intent, to spread hope, great. If the strategic intent is to make a shit ton of money, fine. Don't be unethical about it, but sure, that's okay. Or the strategic intention maybe is to promote an idea that you believe in. And all of those are good reasons, and you just need a reason. Otherwise, your left brain in particular is like, nah, why are we doing this? Why am I spending this hours doing writing or networking or whatever?
Right. Yeah. And feel free to drop your obstacles into chat. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Kati, for sharing. Looking for validation is an obstacle for me. That is so true, right? Like, because when we begin, and I have fallen into this, when we begin to share, particularly, like on social, it's like, has anybody liked that? Or where is it at? How is it being received? And I used to do that a lot. Now I'm really notoriously bad about, I just sort of post, and maybe I'll come back and look at comments. A lot of times I don't. It takes me a lot to prepare content and put it out there. So I don't really come back to it all the time, but that is so natural to look for validation. We are hardwired to want to be accepted and encouraged. And that is why we have survived as human beings. So wanting to be liked, looking for that validations, part of the obstacles. But again, it goes back to that inner awareness and intention, like you talked about, Justin, of knowing no, my intention is to, for me, my personal mission is to inspire people to lead less divided lives. So when I root into that, that helps me move away from that sense of, are people going to like this? Is this going to be well received? It gives me a counterbalance almost. You can physically see it in my body right now. It's like this counterbalance to that pull to say something or post something that's going to be liked. It's like, no, this is important enough that it doesn't really matter how people receive it.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that. It's a great point.
Yeah, validation. I think this is a common obstacle. And I would just gently challenge the word. Validation is a gift you give yourself.
Agree.
Affirmation is a gift someone else gives you. But if they're going to affirm you, you have to be you. So no amount of external validation creates the true identity. It's not a path towards enlightenment or anything. It's mostly a path towards codependency, to be blunt, to chase validation. Speaking from someone that did that for 40 years. And it was for me when I became much more confident in my personal brand, where when I begin to like, oh, it's nice to hear affirm. It's nice to hear when you talk to somebody, I really love the post, or I get messages pretty much every day from people saying, the musing you posted, I printed it and it hangs by my desk or whatever. That's all very affirming, but it's not validating. I struggle at times, especially in relationships, with worthiness, kind of an old wound that I'm still working on, but that's mine to work through. I'm not going to go out and get worthiness by, I could be a best-selling author and you and I, Em, could have a $50 million business. And if I haven't done that inner work to give give myself the gift of validation, then it doesn't matter.
Right. It doesn't matter at all. Mariette brings up a great point, that a lot of the iteration that she's been able to do is because of the support. And that's another obstacle that we set up for ourselves. So when we don't have a community, when we don't have a group of people that is encouraging us, like Justin challenged and encouraged me to really work on my brand. Had I not had that, first of all, stimulus, and then also the encouragement of like, hey, this is great, good job, we're way more likely to just step away. So creating one person, two people coming into a community like BIMA or joining the program that we're going to talk about in a second, that really sets you up for success in developing your personal brand from whatever point you're at. You may have already gone through a process of branding and just feel called to dig a little deeper. But if you don't have that community, those people that can encourage you, and I think it's also connected to affirmation. Is yes, we can have our own internal affirmation and just sort of weigh external validation, not that heavily. But if you don't have encouragement and support, there's a piece that's really missing. And I think this is a huge obstacle. It's a huge block that people don't really talk about. We're such a individualistic society. We think we have to do everything by ourselves, in little bubbles. And that's just not the case. You're going to be more effective when you have folks around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
should we dive
philosophy?
in? Yeah.
The three philosophies of personal branding according to the gospel of personal branding according to Emily and Justin.
Yeah, sure. Let's see here. Let me bring
While you're pulling that up, I think it's also something to prepare for. If you really start to get traction and get noticed, and you struggle with unworthiness or doubt about things like that, there is a requirement to learn to accept praise. It's easy to deflect the praise. It's like, because if you agree to it, then what does that mean about what I'm doing? And your brain is like, what? This is a risk. What are you doing? And so learning to receive praise or receive affirmation, I think, is another part of developing a confident, like authentic brand. Like Brene Brown, she knows she's smart, she knows she's famous, but it doesn't really change her.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we defer that praise when it comes. We just kind of shove it away. Again, just programming to be humble. And instead, you can actually receive it, feel it all the way down, as you get tired of me saying, feel it all the way through, and then let it nourish a little bit and then move on. That's actually a good, but sometimes difficult practice. So our first kind of core philosophy of personal branding, and we've already probably touched on that a little bit, is that personal branding is an act of courage. So what I mean here is that if you see it as constructing an image for the world, if you see it as something you have to do to get ahead in your career, it really just won't have that resonance, right? That energy. We want to think of it as, this is going to be difficult. That's the other thing. Like, a lot of our clients are like, wait, you want me to say this stuff out in the world? You want me to create this content? You want me to share this message? I feel uncomfortable. I feel afraid. I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid that people won't like this. Okay, that's normal. That's good. That's a sign that you are on the right track. Personal branding is going to challenge you, and it's going to require bravery.
Yeah. And courage, this is one of those words, that's highly contextual. Courage, we're not talking about a feeling. Courage isn't really a feeling, I don't believe. It's a behavior. And that's why I'd said earlier about just taking steps, creating a little bit of consistency. Start off with, I'm going to share some ideas. I'm going to share them once a week if you're not doing that now. Or I'm going to reach out to one new person, or I'm going to whatever. The courage begets courage.
Yeah, they can be small steps of courage,
right,
one at a time. That's
exactly.
A great.
Yeah. And so it's courage isn't something you wait for. That's really the point here. The courage is something that is a behavior, and then you get confidence and your confidence starts to build, and then off you go.
Personal branding is defining and sharing your truth. So this is an image of Eddie Vedder at a concert I attended, Innings Fest in Tempe, Arizona. So as I spoke about earlier, and I think we both touched on this, really knowing what to say. So it is this process of having some contemplative time and practices and support around you to define what you truly believe, what is truth to you. And then as that becomes clearer and clearer, and again, it's iterative, it's not like, there are moments that will feel revelatory or breakthrough, but it will continue to evolve into more and more clarity. Then it's finding little ways to share that truth. And it can be, hey, you go rewrite your homepage copy. It could be write a huge Facebook post, but a lot of times it's just smaller acts, right? Okay, so if I want to really own this space of integrated creativity, bringing more creativity into your everyday life, then I need to just kind of slowly start moving my blog posts in the direction of, what do I do as a creative to feed my creative soul? How are we divided? How are we broken? And that means, like, for me, how did I in the past and still fall back into keeping my professional self just very separate from my my homebody self, which is another part of me. So it can be these small things that you begin to share your truth, but it is really about getting clear on what you want to say, and then saying it in ways that appeal to you.
I think it's important here to point out too that unfortunately or sadly, that the way that personal branding is experienced, or sharing this truth, is different, unfortunately, for women versus men. Right? And this is true, I think, with a lot of stuff, is that y'all have a bunch of shit you got to deal with that we don't, related to how you're perceived and how people respond to you and whatnot. And I think it's really important to have that discussion here about sharing your truth, which is that it's acknowledging that there's a different kind of pressure being placed on women thought leaders that men don't deal with.
Well, women and people of color as well.
And women and people of color, right?
Indigenous communities.
Right. Yeah. Anybody that doesn't look like me, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. People, LGBTQ
right.
individuals coming from different perspectives.
Right. And
if you have a fringe perspective, it's going to be more difficult. So thank you for acknowledging. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from sharing the truth standpoint, sharing your truth is that who you are is always enough. And I see, Amber, your question about courage and determining which feedback to listen to. This is somewhat related to that, is that the people that do not respond in a healthy way, we'll say, to your truth are best to ignore. And there's kind of a spectrum here. There's a spectrum with this kind of line in the middle. Let's call it appropriateness. And on one end is predator, people that are trolls, especially I know women in particular deal with a lot of like stuff that's online, like you say, Amber, about behind the keyboard. So you have predator on one end and you have promoter on the other, and the appropriateness line in the middle. And then you have the stuff to the right of the appropriateness line. You have supporters, you have fans, you have maybe people that are admirers or whatever. That's great. And they're going to give you advice and you can always tell them thank you. Anybody on the other side, what I call fishers or fisher people that are fishing or creepy or trolls or just assholes that make generous use of the block and report button, especially on Instagram, because that's the only way that a lot of that troll-like behavior can be dealt with is basically block and report. But that hopefully that spectrum as it relates to sharing your truth and how people are going to respond, that you can kind of keep that spectrum in mind, which is, people on the right of the appropriateness line, listen to what they have to say. Sometimes they're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lastly, personal branding is a practice. So we've also mentioned this as well. We are not going to come out of the gate with everything super clear and everything just popping and everyone's loving it and hitting the like button and sharing. Wouldn't that be nice? But that's not the reality. Personal branding is sitting down at the keys and playing and sounding terrible or, just having lessons, right? So I was listening to one of my new favorite podcasts, Smartless, the other night, and they were interviewing Sarah Silverman, and she was talking about her early days as a comedian, which started out in like middle school, and they asked her to tell like some of her first jokes if she remembered, or was there one that she remembered, and she told this really terrible but funny, probably to her 12-year-old brain joke, and now fast forward all these years later, and she's very accomplished and has been on television programs and is a stand-up that sells out arenas, right? So it's starting there. It's starting wherever you're starting, and it's committing to the practice, and it's giving yourself the grace to know this is a practice and that you will have hard times, and then there'll be other times where it flows and it feels smooth. I go through these ups and downs quite a bit because I am an artist and a creative at my soul. And I think, half introverted, half extroverted. And what I create, I feel very soulfully connected to. So it's not easy for me to share it. And just to share myself. So there are times when I really have to retract and hold things really close. And then there are others where it just like flows and I feel great to share. And sometimes I get really critical of myself when I'm in a retracted state, especially when there are other people around me that are constant, that have more willingness to share a lot. And I compare. And I have to step back and say, no, I'm in more of an internal moment right now. And it'll probably swing back the other way at some point. Mm-hmm. So that's just an example of how we need to give ourselves room in a practice mindset to develop our personal brand.
And speaking of practice, we're excited to share with you this new cohort that we're launching. And just a little bit of background, Emily and I, we have a lot of ideas and we have a lot of content, a lot of things we could put together, a pretty kick-ass program of any sort. But we thought, what is the thing that's going to have the most positive impact in the world? And that is to help people work on their personal brand and build an actual practice. So we're going to wrap by talking a little bit about this program and invite you to it. Just as a setup here, it's a 6-month program. It's a cohort. It likely will be a fairly small cohort because it's a kind of an intimate topic, which is fine by us. And it is designed to teach you and awaken in you all these things that we've been talking about today.
Yeah. So a little bit about how it works. You can see it up on the screen, but we're going to meet once a month. We're going to meet for 90 minutes and it will be recorded. We will discuss during our first meeting, and I'll get to that in a second, just how it's structured, but we're going to have this community platform so everyone in the cohort can support each other between those meetings. So we'll have the one meeting a month, and then throughout the month, we'll be posting into the cohort. You can share how things are going for you. So you have that support throughout. And Justin and I will be the ones facilitating. So you get to work directly with us. And then we have some amazing friends and studio partners that we have been brainstorming around who we want to bring in. And that we have like an arsenal, but we don't have it set up totally yet who is going to come in, because we want to react off of what you're interested in. So this is how we're structuring this cohort. That first session, we're going to explore what has the most relevance, the most timeliness for you. And that's the agenda. That's going to become the agenda for our 6 months together. So this is going to be entirely driven by what you want to explore, learn, share with one another, develop. I think I'm so excited about this because it's so co-creative and collaborative. It's not like us sitting up here telling you, deciding what you need to learn. It's all of us coming together and saying what feels like the most important thing we can do together with this time.
That's how I wanted to design it, but we went with your idea. I'm kidding. It's a great,
you're half kidding.
Yeah. So we have, things like storytelling, understanding your core beliefs, personal mission stuff, goal setting, content development. I would include in there kind of planning, so to bring, in order to have a practice, you have to have discipline, and to have discipline, you have to have a plan.
Totally.
But it is designed by you guys that are participating in the cohort.
Yeah, we'll throw out ideas if you need ideas, but and we will probably cover all these topics. And then how do we make it personal, right? So it doesn't matter, we do all this work unless you can make it personal, and then you can take action, as we said earlier. So we also want to have this format where you get to present on the things that you're working on, and you can receive some challenge and some gentle thought sharing, and then also just some coaching directly from us. And we'll be happy to give guidance on social media, website content, thought leadership, and brand strategy. Again, how do we make it real? We're nerds about how we make it real. And we love to coach people on that process of doing so and support you along those lines. And then we just love to create little tools. I like to draw little worksheets and things like that. So we have a bunch already that we can share, but I'm always creating something new. So there'll be all of those little pieces along the way as well. And those are designed to be artful. So they're inspiring to you, and also to help you practically plan content or think differently about current trends and how you might want to roll those into your content, into your personal brand. It runs the gamut, and you'll be getting definitely some of those.
From a logistics standpoint, the cohort begins November 5th. It runs for 6 months. The price is $2,000. Just for comparison, if you buy a brand sprint from us, which is a one like a short 2+ hour session with us, it's $2,000. So you're getting significant value. We price this in accordance to what we think it's worth, to that long-term impact. And so
there's an option to pay monthly. So that's awesome.
Right. And we put in the chat the link, or you can scan the QR code here and learn more about it and get signed up. And I want to circle back. Somebody asked a question. It was, how do you make yourself share when you don't want to, but know you should? And I would defer to you, because I know that's sometimes been a little bit more of a challenge for you than it is for me. I have to be careful to not share too much.
Yeah, we're on different sides of the spectrum. Well, I would say within that statement, I would say like the language of make yourself share. Again, to that moment where I'm like, I get critical of myself. I'm like right now, like I haven't posted anything on Instagram in a while, and I have like this backlog of things that I have thought of sharing, but just hasn't felt right, and I've been busy. So I think it's stepping back from that, make yourself do it, And it's instead trying to tune into like what feels like it needs to come through. And sometimes that answer is like nothing. And that's okay. I do think so. That's one way. Another way is setting time, just blocking out a half an hour on your calendar 3 days from now, or an hour on your calendar 3 days from now, to sit with that intention of what is interesting to me. I had this professor in my master's program who would always say, like, he would start class sometimes saying, "What are you thinking about?" And I loved that. So I sort of sometimes in spaces that I give myself like that, I kind of ask myself that, what's drawing my attention right now, and just sit with it, and then see if something doesn't develop. And if it doesn't, that's fine. If you spend the time, doodling or lighting candles or straightening up your desk, that's okay too. But I think it's really tuning into what feels like it's coming through, that needs to be, that wants to be shared, rather than making yourself do it. So set aside time, or just give yourself grace to not share.
I will propose a exercise. I'm actually going to put the link to the book. It's by Stephen Kotler. It's called The Art of Impossible. And he has an exercise in there where you make a list of 25 things that you're curious about. And then you look for the overlaps. And his exercise is more about like purpose and what are you going to do with your life. But from a personal branding standpoint, it's an awesome exercise.
Yeah.
Because if you're curious about something, it will have a lot bigger energy pattern than something that you're not curious about. It's really hard to have any consistency with a personal brand about things you're not curious about. I tried that. Like I thought, well, I have to talk about social media or marketing tactics and CRMs. And it's like, man, I don't care about any of that shit. I don't even really post all that much stuff about branding anymore sometimes, because it has to be rooted in curiosity. And so making that list, I think, is a good starting point. Thank you for the great question.
Good tip. Yeah. So if you have any other questions about the program, about anything that we presented, this is your time. This is your space. We've got about 5 minutes left. So we want to hold space for you to maybe you want to share an obstacle, maybe you want to, challenge something we said, or just vent. Like, how is all this hitting you? How does it make you feel? Like, how does the idea of personal branding make you feel? Where are you at? Let us know. Thank you, Mariette, about the comment about the value, and Stephanie. I know Stephanie had to run, but
we love you too, Stephanie.
We really want this group to be very supportive to you and really tailored to you. So we know you'll get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah. I think a common question that we get too is, we already talked about, where do I start? What do I say? How do I sustain it? I think another one, and you kind of touched on this, Em, is the blocking of time. Mm-hmm. There's an art of getting things done in personal branding, and blocking time blocking, I think I'm not saying I think there's two things. There's time blocking to sit down and create, ideation time. And I recommend at least once a month, take a couple hours and just say, what if? I love the question the professor asked, what if? And then start, jotting them all down. I do that with paranoia, but that's a different exercise. And so the other thing is, so that's time blocking. The other thing related to this is downtime. Is don't work on your personal brand. Go for a walk, go take that nap, get that massage, whatever. And when you let personal branding or branding in general is a right brain exercise first, and then a left brain exercise of execution. If you have fatigued your left brain and you haven't nurtured your right brain, it's going to be really hard to justify any sort of time or return on investment. So block time and downtime are ways I think that you can start to build a structure that works for you.
Yeah, it goes back to branding being self-care. And once I flipped that switch, instead of thinking of it as another thing that I had to do, it helped me. Because sometimes I do. Like about a month ago, I had like a day for myself. My husband and daughter were supposed to be out of town, but then they ended up being in town. But I had created a whole day just for me. So it was like, I'm doing what I'm doing. And that really helps. Yeah, time blocking is very powerful.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we appreciate all of you so much for coming and sharing this time with us. And we invite you to reach out to us directly. You know, you can always get us at Root and River is our handle on most all the social medias. And you can also check out that landing page. Feel free to reach out with questions. If you're already a member of our community, you can post questions in the community. Let us know what your interest level is. We'd love to have you. We'd love to talk through any kind of hesitations that you might have. And if you've already, you know, if you're not feeling called to it, but you know the power of the work, please feel free to share it with somebody else that you think might benefit, or that you'd be curious to see how their brand develops. What a compliment that would be to receive something like that from someone. Like, I'd love to hear from you more. Have you ever thought about doing something like this? I'm thinking about it, or this could be helpful for you.
Yeah, especially I like there was that book, The Proper Care and Feeding of Men, and it was mostly purchased by men for their partners. And this can be one of those things, or if you have friends, or you're in your primary relationships, you're like, you really need to work on your personal brand, then this is the way to do it. It's a little bit of a gentle way of saying, what did I say to you, Em, in our first conversation about this? You need to get your social media up to code.
No, you said you need to get your brand up to code.
You get your brand up to code. Yeah.
Believe me, I remember that. I was like,
so yeah, have that conversation. You're going to get the recording and share that with somebody that needs to get their brand up to code.
Yes.
And so start there too. It doesn't have to be somebody that has already got it figured out. All right.
Thank you to everyone. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and we'll be sending out the recording as well.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.